Hi everyone, welcome to this webinar. My name's Emma Simpkins. I am from Botanic Gardens Australia and New Zealand. We're a network of over 90 botanic gardens and arboreta right across Australia and New Zealand. And this month is a very exciting month for us. It's Botanic Gardens Week from the 18th to the 24th of May. And this month we are celebrating Where Our Health Grows, which is an opportunity for us to showcase the powerful role that gardens play in supporting our mental, physical and social well-being. So you are joining us for our Grow Well series, where we're showcasing experts and talking about exactly this, how botanic gardens can support our health and well-being, and we're being increasingly recognised in the green health infrastructure. So today is one of 4 sessions, and we're really glad for you to be a part of it today. If you want to check out more about what Botanic Gardens of Australia and New Zealand do, please check out our website, begans.org.au. We've got a competition running this month to participate and do some things that actively will support your health and well-being. So please check out our website, and there's lots of wonderful prizes to win. So I'd like to introduce our guest today. We've got Dr. Gayle Souter-Brown, an award-winning designer, author and researcher, director of Greenstone Design. And we've got Robyn Simcock from the newly formed New Zealand Bioeconomy Institute. You might have known it as Manaaki Whenua Land Care Research, who's an expert in soil ecology and green infrastructure. Welcome to you both.
Kia ora.
Thanks so much for being here today. And I know well-being and connection to nature is both really, really important to you both. So I wonder, Gayle, can you talk a little bit about what a nature prescription is?
Gosh, diving in at the deep end. A nature prescription is a loose definition of a nature-based activity that is prescribed by a healthcare practitioner. So the prescription part of the name is the clue that it's a medical intervention where a doctor, a health improvement practitioner, community well-being practitioner will suggest that the patient gets outside into a particular environment and spends time walking, sitting, just being in that natural environment. So the green prescription is an opportunity that's widely used across North America, into Europe, and just starting to be seen in Australia. Well, Australia, not so much New Zealand yet, but that is just coming.
Oops, we lost you again.
Overwhelming evidence that says, yeah, nature is good for us. And so this idea of the series that you're doing here, Where Health Grows, is absolutely fantastic to see that the idea of nature prescriptions, yeah, it is coming into New Zealand. It's just starting in Australia, and it has to be the way forward for health and wellbeing generally.
Awesome. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the work you do in this area?
A lot.
Maybe in the New Zealand, Australian context.
I'm a landscape architect, and so from that point of view, I design environments specifically for health and wellbeing outcomes. What we've found through my own research, through my PhD, and through others' research is that not all environments are created, or not all nature is created equally. And so just being outside is not enough. We need that real depth of biodiversity. We need that depth of serenity, of views, of feelings of safety, of being away. So what I do as a designer is I design those environments to achieve specific health outcomes in schools and care homes and parks and gardens, and workplaces, wherever. And I also advocate for that. I advise councils, governments, through the International Federation of Landscape Architects. I co-direct the Urban Health Working Program. So what we're doing with that is we're taking research into practice, and we do that here in New Zealand, but we do that globally as well. So yeah, I do a lot of talking, a lot of writing, and trying to make this opportunity more widely available to more people, because it is the ultimate. We've got to be able to reduce the demand for healthcare services, and we can do so by creating healthy environments, and we know how to do that, and it's inexpensive. It doesn't cost the earth, literally or figuratively. And so it just makes sense to have parks and gardens available where people are. So that's what I do, briefly, broadly.
So, yeah, but I guess, in a city where there's so much urban development and people are really reliant on green space being accessible because they might not have anything in their own backyard, we can really see, particularly here at the Auckland Botanic Gardens, that our local community are here every day, walking their dog, meeting with friends, taking their children to walk around, feed the ducks. They might not have that space at home to do those types of activities that might just simply feel like a recreation activity, but really there's something much deeper going on there.
Absolutely. And so, as you've said, it's that the Botanic Garden. So some small towns may not have a Botanic Garden, but they will have a public park, playground, whatever it might be. But just having some grass with a tree in the corner is not enough. And that's what research and practice has shown us, is that it needs to be designed specifically to facilitate health and well-being, which means that we are putting in those pockets of places where you can feel away, so that it's not just a vast open expanse. So like you have at the Botanic Gardens where you are in Auckland, it's got all of those little areas in there, so that depending on your mood, on your need on the day, those local residents, the local community, they can go and find their path today that suits them in that particular moment. And that's what's so important.
With the Botanic Gardens Challenge, we're encouraging people to do something really active and intentional throughout the month of May. Not only can they win prizes, but hopefully that kind of meaningfully contributes to their everyday lives. So we've got a 20-minute reset, we're doing some mindfulness meditation, there's kind of a colour hunt, so looking and observing in nature, moving your body, and then talking to someone in the gardens, whether that's staff or volunteers. Do either of you have recommendations or ways to make that really more meaningful and intentional? Are there ways to disconnect from our everyday lives?
I suppose I could start, Gayle, and then you can give us the depth. So the international work has shown that the more senses that you can engage, the better. So it's the benefits are well beyond just a visual sense. So in the gardens, in different spaces, you will notice different scents. It's autumn. In your areas with deciduous leaves, you will hear the crunch underfoot. You will smell the deciduous leaves. You may notice fungi, so that's the learning that I'm gaining from our review, but also working with Gayle, is actually the multi-sensory importance and taking time. It's not how many steps you're doing. It's actually a connection to place. And in terms of having a conversation with someone, hopefully someone you like, because that's more important than someone you're going to have an argument with. Although I do know from talking to colleagues in the health system that some very switched on colleagues, if they have a difficult conversation, will take that person for a walk through the gardens because it's not so confrontational. So, yeah, it depends if you're trying to help them or help yourself, I guess. Gayle?
What I didn't mention earlier when you asked what I do in this space is I'm a sensory garden design specialist. And so what Robyn's saying in terms of integrating all the senses is really important. So when people are out in the gardens, what I say in every space that we design, we spend a lot of time with client groups taking them through the space, because not everybody knows what to do once they get there. They think they're supposed to, as Robyn was alluding to, go for a walk or go for a jog or be busy. But actually just stopping, sitting down, put your back up against a tree if there's no seat available. If there is a seat available, sometimes sitting against the trees actually more comfortable in the seat, but looking up and seeing what's happening up above you. And so up through that tracery of leaves, looking up at the clouds, looking down, and yes, you might see fungi, you might see something happening on ground level, but there's always something going on. And it's that soft fascination that takes you away from your everyday troubles, your everyday self. And so, yes, it's much more than just sight, but if you take sight as your dominant sense, if you are able-sighted, the looking up, the looking down, the appreciating where you are in that moment. And what we've found is that by giving people opportunities to rest, to say, yes, you're coming into this space and you might think it's to be active, but no, it's actually to be still. And the more still people are, the more they then find that they want to become more active, which is sort of that slight sort of paradox whereby actually by slowing down, you then have the energy and the interest to move forward and move on and go and explore and become curious and problem solve, and difficult conversations are made easier outside in nature. So it is that multifactorial idea where so many things are going on in nature, like life. And so when you are in your botanic gardens or your local park, so long as it's got all the shrubs and the layered planting and the birds and the bees all going on, you've got that opportunity to really connect with nature, with yourself, and then out with others as your stress levels drop down. And it's all about that stress reduction.
Yeah, that's really important. Are there other physical things that happen to us when we're doing these activities?
Yes, heart rate slows, breathing rate slows, salivary cortisol, the chronic stress marker, that is reduced. So much goes on. Yeah, concentration, your rest and digest state kicks in. There are myriad pathways around the body that respond positively to a positive experience of nature. So if you're being chased by a lion, a tiger, a bear, whatever, not a positive experience. You go into full flight and fight mode, which is entirely appropriate. But when we have that sort of that benign nature, such as we do in New Zealand, less so in Australia for the Australian audience, you've got that sense to really relax. So you can just lie on the grass. Nothing's going to bite you. There's nothing there that's going to harm you. So you can absolutely, that concept of earthing that sounds a bit woo-woo, actually it feels really good just to lie back and just relax into the earth and let the earth just support you. So there's so much going on electromagnetically, depending on your particular philosophical viewpoint. Yeah, there's a lot that happens within the body, within the mind, within that nature connection experience.
There's also been some very exciting recent work from both Scandinavia and from Adelaide showing the impact on immune response markers,
Yes.
like natural killer cells, so showing increases in beneficial immune response markers from nature exposure.
And gut microbiome and getting soil under your fingernails. Yeah, it's so much going on. Yeah.
Wow, that's, at face value, this seems like it could, just has some nice benefits, but those are really powerful things that change the quality of people's lives that we're talking about, things that
Very much so.
we can't easily control. So is there any particular part of your research that is targeted like a particular mental health or physical health or a target audience that you've seen really powerful change through this work?
Yes. We did some work in a workplace, and it was a workplace wellbeing intervention whereby productivity was down, staff cohesion was challenged, and through a sensory garden, people found that, so they spent 30 minutes once a week in the sensory garden, and one of the things was being allowed to go outside. So we had to sort of work through the management structure to get those permissions. And people started to feel valued was the first thing in their workplace, that they were told that they were special enough to be allowed to go outside for half an hour, which was curious that they didn't feel that previously. But then, having spent 30 minutes once a week outside over a 4-week period, the effects were profound. We've had some people take themselves off long-term antidepressants. Some people no longer felt the need to drink wine in the evening. Some people reported that they played more with their children, that they went to other parks and gardens in their weekends, that they could problem solve better, that they could work harder, that they could retain information. There was so much going on in that workplace situation. Now, that was a general sort of mental health, productivity type sort of a situation. There was another example where we designed a sensory garden for severe and profound complex needs individuals in a residential care facility. And in actual fact, it was a care facility back to back with a severe autistic spectrum needs unit. And so one was very structured, rigid, straight lines for the people with severe autism. And the other side was maximum sensory stimulation. You know, we had mud puddles and things to squelch their toes through. There was so much going on in there. And the effect on the residents was just, it was astounding. So there was one individual who was 16 years old, had never smiled, was physically the size of a 6-month-old, but developmentally more like a 6-week-old. Placed her under a tree and she smiled for the first time in this space. So there's so much that we don't understand and then so much that we do. And so extrapolating out from what we do understand to be able to see the joy, we don't need to understand what made that person smile necessarily in that sort of what mechanisms were in place, but to know that, okay, we have fundamentally changed this woman's quality of life says that it's worthwhile doing. And so for the autistic people, mood was enhanced, you know, stress levels were lowered, costs of care were reduced, all sorts of benefits. But it was all about improving that quality of life by improving the environment, by bringing in more nature. So bringing the gardens to them where they were was important because they didn't have a botanic garden, a public garden down the road. So yeah, we've done lots around the world. We've worked with all sorts of Parkinson's and stroke rehab and spinal injuries and diabetes and heart cancers. Yeah, lots. And it all makes a difference in slightly different ways, but it's that improving quality of life that says, yeah, this is a good thing.
And that really knock-on effect to other parts of life. If it's reducing the cost of care and things, that's reducing other pressures on
Absolutely.
families. That is incredible. Really, really powerful stuff. You've kind of touched on a few things that are physically in the places that you're designing. Can you talk a little bit more about what is great in terms of design elements for promoting good health and well-being, whether that's for a particular type of audience or more broadly?
I want to jump right in and say seats is the first thing that comes to mind. And it's a curious thing. Schools around the world were responding to childhood obesity, and they were ripping out seats from school playgrounds in loads of countries around the world and saying, right, we've got to get kids more active. Well, actually, the opposite was true, that the more seats you put in, the more relaxed you feel because you're allowed, in inverted commas, to sit down. So you might or might not sit, but you've got that sense of, oh, I can if I want to. And so you become more active. So putting in seats where young and old can sit comfortably. It was really interesting. I did a peer review of an intervention in Christchurch after the earthquakes, and beautiful old curved park benches, you know, the timber with the metal arms at the end, arm, leg, integral. They were being ripped out as being old-fashioned, and new hard-edged concrete with anti-skate grommets put in. Well, the old ones, they had the comfort, they had the curves that feel softer to look at. So that's a psychological perception. Whereas the hard lines, the straight edges feel more aggressive. It's a harsher environment. And so putting in seats is important, but getting the right seats is also important. So from a design point of view, curving paths less travelled. So yes, you've got to be able to get from here to there, so you need an access route. That's a given. But actually people want to be able to step off the main path. They want to be able to go and explore and feel like they're away from the crowds, the rush, the hordes, the people, the noise. And so having those little curved places that go off on the side. A really good example is in Paris in front of the Eiffel Tower. It's a massive park, the Champ de Mars, and it's got the very typical French straight line, the Grand Allée, and it's very formal. But on the edges, it's the most informal, beautiful space with little mounds planted, grasses. So it's a green swathe that you can sit on, and then there's sort of the loose planting that goes on around there that entices you in, that makes you feel hidden away. But the planting is sort of knee-high when you're standing, but head-high when you're sitting. So as soon as you're sitting on the ground, you're hidden, and you've got that sense of being away, of retreat, of refuge. So when we're designing spaces, it's about putting in those places that are appropriate for the age. So you can provide a jungle for children that, you know, might be 60 centimetres tall, whereas a jungle for an adult needs to be slightly taller. But you can maintain sight lines, you can do all sorts of things, you know, depending on the need, but still maintain that sense of refuge. That's the real key to whatever we're doing. And so seats come to mind first of all, and then all the planting that goes in around that, the paths to get you there, that link, that take you in a loop, that just give you that opportunity to go and explore, that give you a reason to explore. That brings it all together.
Robyn, is there anything you want to talk about?
Yeah, I liked well, I like what Gayle talked about, or hasn't talked about, around the different path surfaces. And I thought that's a relatively straightforward thing to change that people don't necessarily think about before we go into plants. Can you explain that, Gayle?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So with path surfaces, you get different texture underfoot, and you also get a different acoustic. And so you're getting two different feedback loops. And you're also getting, by having a soft surface, a permeable surface, you're getting all sorts of drainage impacts, and you're also getting heat absorption impacts. So if you have a natural surface such as a lime chip, for example, or a crushed shell or bark, or even, you know, sort of walking across, you know, sort of that view that you've got behind you there, Emma, a mown path through grass gives you that sense of going something completely different. It's soft, it's quiet, or it's crunchy, or it's got that different sensory input that comes with that. That's not all just tarmac.
Definitely. And I think, Robyn, you'll know this well. We have trialled lots of meadows here at the Botanic Gardens, and we often talk about a thing called cues to care to show people that we're being intentional. We haven't forgotten this place, but putting a meandering path through places like that rather than a straight one definitely gives people a better opportunity to explore and interact and kind of feel whimsical. And it's wonderful.
It also makes it feel intentional. And it's that sense of one of the first gardens I designed, opening day, people came in and they said, and they were sort of looking around and they weren't quite sure what to say. And then they said, it's a bit messy. And I said, well, yes, life is a bit messy. And it's that sense that with nature, we've got an opportunity to provide that metaphor for life. Because it's very easy to think that we as human beings, with our bulldozers and our earth moving equipment and whatever, our big budgets, we can control the world. We can control nature. Well, no, we can't. And we can't control everything in life. Yes, there are certain things that we can. We can turn electricity on and off. Yep, fine. But with nature, we've got that reminder that there are natural rhythms going on. And so to be able to have those reminders there, those imperfections, leave the long grass, see what
I think that's Sheffield's line.
We love long grass, don't we, Robyn?
We do. We don't like Kikuyu that much, but the other thing that Gayle might have mentioned in terms of connecting and messiness is the retention of dead wood and even the addition of dead wood, dead trees, retaining dead trees. They do it really well in Christchurch with signage to explain the importance of cavities of wood and of fungi as habitat. And you also see it being done really well in parts of the UK. They're a bit ahead of us in that area. When you get dead wood on the ground or stumps, you have a potential for a lot more biodiversity. And when you have undisturbed ground, so it's leaf litter or perennial plantings, you have the potential for many more beneficial insects who get damaged when you have disturbed areas. It also helps with the soil.
Yeah, absolutely. We love to layer in some biodiversity benefits that I'm sure add that extra value to an experience being in nature, seeing pollinators visiting flowers and birds nesting in trees. Did you want to touch on the kind of the value of diversity of plantings in these types of spaces?
I think you could probably cover the diversity of plantings much better than I am. I would note that in a place like New Zealand and like Australia with millions of years of co-adaptation, if we want to have native plants, that also gives us native animals. Without having those, the native plants, we then miss out on the whole opportunity of the insects and the birds that are only with them. And that in New Zealand, I would be picking up our ferns and mosses as something that we're really rich and very ancient with a massive lovely little moths that are only found with those ferns and mosses. But yes, the more the merrier is, and if it's local and of place, even better. Then you might get local and of place animals like cute little moths that don't hurt anyone, but they can come out and be seen.
Yeah, and I think Botanic Gardens are really well placed to be showcasing such a diversity of species and really intentional about creating a garden that has wow impact and creates a feeling and a sense of place. And not only do the layers of vegetation have kind of biodiversity benefits, but like Gayle was talking about, the kind of the heights of hedges and sight lines all add to the experience when you're in the gardens. I wondered if you wanted to touch on what's happening in the research world in terms of New Zealand and Australia. What's coming up for health and wellbeing and green prescriptions.
Robyn, do you want to talk to this?
I could do, but I have a very whiny dog. So if you could talk to her, that would be great.
Sure. So there's some interesting work being done at the moment with one of the hospitals, some oncologists, and looking at how we could benefit patients and staff through nature connection. So nature prescription, if you like, for staff and patients. So just sort of at the early stage, but really exciting. And the interest is incredibly heartening through the hospital, right through the layers of the hospital. So to be able to see where that goes, could be really significant for New Zealand, locally, nationally, and internationally. So yeah, it's an exciting time to be thinking about where your health grows.
Awesome. That's something we'll watch this space eagerly, I'm sure. Is there anything else that you think you want to share that our audience might like to hear about before we start to wrap up? I have one last question for you, but I thought if there's something we're dying to share, now would be the time to do so.
There are some fantastic books available that are really easy to read. I don't know if you can see on screen, but I've got one here by Kathy Willis called Good Nature. It's an accessible read. It's an excellent read. It tells you everything that you've ever wanted to know about the health benefits of various parts of nature connection. So that goes through so much. So yeah, check out your local library, see what's available online on Kindle. There's so much out there in terms of ebooks today too. But just becoming curious about where your health grows and becoming aware of where you feel good. And you might notice, as I've started doing, that certain trees, I feel better under certain trees than others. And so whether that's the longevity of the tree or the energy of the tree in terms of, is it a short-lived tree or an older tree? Yeah, I haven't figured that out. Do I need to know? Probably not. But it's just that sense of curiosity of going out there and saying, this feels really good, and enjoying that. But getting outside and making the time for yourself to go and experience nature up close and personal is a really good thing to do.
I love that. I have a special spot for orchids, and whenever I see this particular orchid I study for my master's, it kind of feels like seeing an old friend. There's something comforting when you see that tree or that garden or what have you. So again, I can't really explain what it is, but it just puts a smile on my face every time.
Nice.
I can send a link to some websites, and it includes a podcast you can listen to if you're walking, by Kathy Willis. If that's helpful.
Yeah, wonderful. We'll put that in the recording notes for everyone to access. And the last question I wanted to ask you both is, do you have a favourite place in a botanic garden, your local botanic garden, that kind of is somewhere that you are drawn to, or had an experience in a botanic garden that kind of is meaningful to you?
I have a favourite spot in the Christchurch Botanic Garden. There's a rose garden, not the main rose garden, but there's a rose garden over close to the hospital, in fact. And it's an enclosed space with one opening. So it's a large open space, but enclosed. And so you've got views out, but it speaks to all the researchers like, this is why I like it. So intellectually, I understand why I feel so good in the space, but it's got everything. So it's not just roses. It's got height, it's got colour, it's multiple different species supporting the rose. So it's got that seasonal interest. There's always something going on. There's comfortable seats. Yeah, that for me is gorgeous. And then in the Wellington Botanic Garden, the stream and the glowworms, the Oamaru Botanic, sorry, lots of botanic gardens, lots of beautiful places. Botanic gardens are yeah, happy places, happy places.
In Auckland, if I've got an extra 5 minutes on looking at the water sensitive design, I sneak into the children's garden and sit with that beautiful big kiruru underneath the perere trees. And that's, again, a very tactile, quiet space, as long as there's not kids in the kids' garden, that I love. And it's full of natives and diverse and rich, smells wonderful. And there's usually kiruru there too.
I love that. I think
I've
many
forgotten that
botanic
one.
gardens have a children's garden, and I like to think I'm just a big child also, but there's something about the design of a children's garden that really takes you back into a special place, and I think anyone can benefit from those types of gardens. So thanks for sharing your special places. I'm sure some of our listeners will check those out if they haven't already. So I just want to wrap up our webinar today. Thank you both so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you over the last half an hour or so and sharing your insights and your research. As we've heard, Botanic Gardens are more than a beautiful place. I often say we're not just a pretty place. There's lots going on behind the scenes in terms of education, conservation and research, but also wanting to make sure that these places offer health and wellbeing benefits. We really are in the medical field, and I think the research that you're about to embark on will really solidify that for us. So thank you in advance. We're looking forward to seeing that work. There'll be another webinar coming up next Monday, and if you have been inspired by this conversation, please check out Botanic Gardens, our website, begans.gov.au. Take on our challenge this month. We'd love to see all your wonderful posts through social media, and thank you all again for being part of Botanic Gardens Week.